Hi, it's Joy. Welcome back to another Whimsy Stamps video. Today we're going to talk about how to embellish sympathy cards. I know that most of us struggle with making sympathy cards, and are we supposed to make them ornate? Are we supposed to keep them simple? And I like to go somewhere in the middle of those two. So I am using the A2 Magnolia die, the Sympathy's So Deeply Sorry stamp set, and the notched rectangles. So I do my die cutting first, and you're seeing me poke out just the little pieces of the Magnolia die. And I choose to adhere that with an Elmer's Bond glue. It's just a spray adhesive. Any kind that you have would work. You could also use wet glue, whatever you want. I find that using an ink smushing tool gets me the best adherence, so that's what you're seeing me do, is just kind of press that down. Now I am going to be coloring with Caron markers. I find that they work best on Bristol Smooth, at least for me. I'm not a expert watercolorist by any means. In fact, I hardly ever do it. So Bristol gives me the best results. So I die cut the second largest notched rectangle, and then I stamp down the floral image with the branch with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, because this is a pigment ink, and then I apply clear embossing powder to it. And the reason I do that is when you emboss, it creates wells, so that way it kind of contains your color. That way you don't have a lot of runoff. So I start out by putting down the henna colored Caron marker along the branch of this floral. And you see I stick just to one side and I leave a lot of white. That's because I'm going to bring in a damp paintbrush, and you'll see me kind of tap that off on my glass mat to keep it as dry as possible. And that extends my color. And I just pretty much do that same process for everything. Now I will say that when you watercolor, you've got to go from one area to the next, but if you have a really wet brush, you're going to get a lot of bleeding, and you may get the colors to run together. So I try to skip around from one area, then work on a second. So talking about sympathy cards, I like to keep them pretty clean and simple, almost on the elegant side. So what I did, instead of having a lot of color and a lot of stuff going on, I used the Magnolia die as an embellishment. So I did white on white. Now I like all of my whites to match, so I used Bristol Smooth for my entire card, even my card base. I'm a little neurotic when it comes to that, but again, you could use whatever paper you wanted. For the leaves, I used apple green and olive green. So once the apple green was down, I just dotted in some of the olive while it was still damp. Here I am using magenta red for the petals. So where the artist drawn lines are, I'm using that as my guide for shadows or the deepest saturation of the flower. And I am drawing that in. I did not put any water down, so this is a dry panel. And I will again come in with my damp paintbrush and extend those out. If you're interested in this die or the stamp set, everything is linked in the description box below to the Whimsy shop. And again, I am coming in with my card with my paintbrush very damp, and I'm extending that. Now that's a little too bright in my opinion. That's one thing I like about Caron markers, is they are highly pigmented. But if you don't want that pigment, I would suggest kind of scribbling it off on a palette and then picking it up with a wet brush. But to fix that, I took a damp baby wipe and I blotted it, so I got a much softer color. So that's true of any watercolor. So if you didn't want to use Caron markers, if you just wanted to use a regular palette, you absolutely could. You could use your dye inks. This is a pretty universal watercolor technique. Finally, I bring in the soft peach just to add a little bit more color to it. And again, I'm extending those colors with a damp brush. I did think about splattering this with some of the pink so that the whole panel would be embellished, and that's another way that you could embellish a sympathy card. I chose not to. I just really am feeling the clean and simple vibe of this card. So as we finish up, I did decide to matte this potentially. So I cut out a black panel so only that the notches would show, and it still wasn't speaking to me. I think it normally that is usually my style, but I chose just to keep this white. I popped it up with one of the 3D foam creative sheets, just some of the scrap pieces that I had, and I'm adhering that in the center. And now I'm doing the So Deeply Sorry stamp from that stamp set, and I'm also stamping that with VersaFine Clair just so that my inks match. I like this one because it's very dark and crisp. And then I'm just showing you how I line up my sentiment inside my Tim Holtz guillotine trimmer. I use the guide to line it up so that it's equally spaced on all sides. So that's a tip there. And I do pop that up on foam tape. The part where the Y is doubled up so it'll all be the same height. Now for embellishment, a lot of times I leave embellishment off of sympathy cards, but I think I want to show that you can still embellish a card. I mean, it's truly up to you what your style is. So I chose some clear gems that are like dewdrops, and I just chose 2 or 3 different sizes. So I put 1 on the petal so it would look like a water drop. I put 3 on that left-hand side, and then I added 2 more around the floral just to create another triangle. I usually triangles or embellishments in 3s. It keeps the eye moving. So thank you so much for hanging out with me. I really do appreciate it. I would like it if you would consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. We at Whimsy love hanging out with you, and we value your time and your relationship with us. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.